Instant karma rarely looks like something loud or revealing. Most often, it's a few minutes when a person is sure that the rules are not written for them, that aggression, impudence, or pressure will help them get what they want faster. But reality works differently. In these stories, no one planned the punishment. It just happened, in ordinary places. At a gas station, parking lot, airport, or restaurant. 5 cases where overconfidence played against those who were sure of their own impunity. Enjoy the video. Texas, summer 2019, late afternoon. A gas station near an interstate highway was slowly filling up with cars pulling off the road after a long day at work. The line was long but orderly, with no shouting or conflicts. People waited in silence, looking at their phones, listening to the radio, watching the cars in front of them move slowly. Michael Reed stood almost at the very end of this column and felt irritation building up inside him with every passing minute. He was 38, worked as a sales manager, and was used to living in a constant time crunch. In the evening, he had a meeting in a neighboring city that would determine his bonus and further contracts, and now every minute of waiting seemed like an unacceptable loss. He looked at the straight line of headlights in front of him and was convinced that all these people were just wasting his time, not realizing how important this trip was to him. After a few minutes, Michael stopped holding back. He looked in the mirror again, turned the steering wheel sharply, and drove into the oncoming lane, beginning to pass the convoy of cars. Several drivers honked their horns, some slowed down, but Michael didn't even look in their direction. In his mind, it didn't look like a violation, but a smart decision, a quick way to get what he needed. He confidently cut off several cars and stopped at the first free column, feeling the brief satisfaction of being ahead of everyone. At that moment, as he stepped on the brake and reached for the fuel gun, the engine suddenly stalled. At first, Michael didn't pay much attention to it. He turned the ignition key, expecting the usual starter sound. The car did not respond. He tried again, then again, pushing harder on the gas pedal as if that would help. The dashboard flashed and went off. An unnatural silence reigned inside the car. Michael felt anxiety rising in his chest, but he didn't want to admit the problem yet. He got out of the car, opened the hood, and immediately smelled the pungent odor of overheated metal and oil. The engine was hot, and the oil level was almost at zero. The machine, which he had ignored in routine inspections and constantly overloaded, simply refused to work. As Michael stood by the open hood and looked helplessly inside, the line behind him began to move. The same cars he had just passed were calmly pulling up to other pumps, filling up and moving on. No one stopped to say anything. No one laughed or got into arguments. Some didn't even look in his direction, while others gave him a brief glance without emotion, as if the situation were completely mundane. Michael tried to move the car to the side, but it was impossible to do it alone. He could feel his initial feeling of superiority changing to shame and powerlessness with each passing minute. A few minutes later, a gas station attendant approached him and in a calm, almost indifferent tone, informed him that the car was blocking the entrance to the pump and that a tow truck should be called. There was neither reproach nor sympathy in his voice, just a dry fact. Michael sat down on the curb and pulled out his phone. Missed calls and messages from his colleagues were already flashing on the screen. He knew that even if the tow truck arrived quickly, he wouldn't be able to make it to the meeting. The sun was slowly sinking, the asphalt was cooling, and the gas station was gradually emptying. The tow truck showed up almost 40 minutes later. Michael watched in silence as his car was lifted onto the platform, as the metal cables were pulled and secured, and as the car that had been a symbol of his confidence and control an hour earlier was lifted. There were no spectators around, no stage for humiliation. It was just an ordinary evening in which things had not gone according to his plan. He realized that trying to bend the rules had not given him any advantage. On the contrary, 1 minute of overconfidence resulted in lost time, a disrupted meeting, and additional expenses. No one punished him on purpose or sought justice. Reality did it itself, without emotion or explanation, leaving Michael on the sidelines with the clear result of his own decision. Florida, spring 2021, late weekend morning. The parking lot of a large supermarket near a residential area was quickly filling up with cars. People came with families. Some were in a hurry to shop before the heat. Some stopped by for just a few small things. The parking spaces were clearly marked, with yellow lines and signs prohibiting parking for emergency services. Linda Carter arrived in her large SUV a little later than the others and immediately felt irritated, driving slowly between the rows several times. But she did not see any free spaces at the entrance, and she did not want to walk any further. She was used to not having to adapt to others, and she was convinced that she would always find a way to get comfortable. Noticing an area near the entrance where the lanes intersected and there was enough space, Linda did not hesitate to stop so that her car blocked 2 spaces at once. She noticed the emergency access sign, but decided that it was a formality that did not concern her. A supermarket security guard approached almost immediately and calmly asked her to move her car, explaining that this area should be free. But Linda didn't even listen to the end. She replied sharply that she had stopped just for a few minutes and wasn't going to look for another spot, being sure that no one would do anything while she was in the store. Turning around, she confidently walked to the entrance, leaving the SUV as if the rules existed for someone else. Inside the store, Linda calmly walked between the aisles, took a long time choosing products, stopped at the promotions, checked her phone, and took her time. Her few minutes stretched out to almost half an hour. Meanwhile, in the parking lot, several cars could not drive through the blocked area. One of the entrances to the building actually remained blocked. Security contacted the administration again, and this time the decision was final. Calling a tow truck became a standard procedure without discussion. When the tow truck pulled into the parking lot, a few people stopped to watch, but without much emotion. For most, it was just a simple violation that finally had consequences. Linda's car was quickly prepared for the lift. The wheels were secured and pulled onto the platform, at which point she was still standing in line at the checkout, unaware that the situation had already been resolved without her. When Linda came out of the store with the packages in her hands, the first thing she saw was an empty spot where she had left her car. At first, she stopped, looking around as if she had just made a mistake. Then she came closer and realized that the car was gone. Only tire tracks and a few indifferent looks from passers-by remained on the asphalt. The same security guard approached her and briefly informed her that the car had been towed because of a parking violation, his tone even and neutral, without anger or sympathy. Linda began to get indignant, raising her voice and demanding an explanation, but the answer was simple. The rules were clearly marked. She had received a warning. Standing with her bags at the entrance, she called the evacuation service number and listened to the parking lot address and the amount of the fine, which turned out to be much more than the cost of all her purchases. Her confidence quickly changed to anger and powerlessness. No arguments worked. No emotions changed anything. A few hours later, Linda was picking up her SUV from the parking lot, signing the paperwork and paying the fine, and silently driving, feeling very irritated, but without the same confidence. Her desire to save a few steps had turned into lost time, money, and a humiliating experience. No one was trying to teach her a lesson on purpose, and no one was happy about her problems. But this time the rules worked as they should have always worked, and instant karma came not in the form of a scandal, but in the form of a regular tow truck that arrived faster than she expected. Los Angeles, fall 2018, morning in the international terminal of a major airport, where the air is always saturated with the smell of coffee, disinfectant, and fatigue. The flow of passengers moved slowly but orderly. People with suitcases stood in long lines to board, checking the time on the board, silently accepting the inevitability of waiting. Joshua Miller was late to the terminal and realized it as soon as he saw the crowd at his gate. He was 29, worked in marketing, and was used to thinking that his time was worth more than most people's. The day before, he had been late for a meeting, thinking he would be able to slip in at the last minute, as he had done before. But this time, reality did not fit his schedule. The line was moving slowly, and every minute he waited only increased his irritation. Joshua looked at the people in front of him and was sure that they simply did not understand the seriousness of his situation, and therefore had to give in. He didn't stand at the end, but immediately walked closer to the boarding counter, gesturing that he needed to get through immediately. The airline employee calmly and clearly explained that boarding was first come, first served, and that he had to wait with everyone else, but these words only made him more angry. Joshua raised his voice and started talking about his urgent business, his ticket, and how he was a frequent flyer and not used to this kind of treatment. He pulled out his phone and started filming the employee, commenting on camera that he was being deliberately detained and his rights were being violated. People around him silently looked away, some sighed nervously, but no one intervened. The employee asked him again in a sterner tone to stop filming and move away from the counter, explaining that such behavior violated airport rules. Joshua took this as a challenge and began to speak even louder, accusing the staff of incompetence and threatening to complain on social media. At that moment, security officers approached the counter, their appearance calm and casual, without haste or emotion. They asked Joshua to step aside to clarify the circumstances, but he continued to argue, convinced that the situation would be resolved in his favor as soon as he insisted enough. While security checked his documents and wrote a brief report on the incident, boarding continued without him. The line was slowly shrinking, people were getting on the plane, and Joshua stood off to the side, still trying to prove his case. When he finally stopped talking and turned his attention to the board, the flight status had already changed to boarding complete. The airline employee calmly informed him that the plane was closed and no more passengers were being accepted. Joshua tried to object, demanding that they immediately open the boarding gate specifically for him, but the answer was short and final. Because of his disruptive and aggressive behavior, he was also informed of an internal warning from the airline, which made it difficult to book further flights. He stood in the middle of the terminal with a ticket that no longer meant anything, and for the first time he felt not anger, but emptiness. All he had gotten for his confidence in his own exclusivity was a missed flight, wasted time, and complete disregard from the system he was trying to push through. No one screamed or cheered his defeat. The rules just worked the way they always do, and instant karma came not loudly, but coldly and categorically, leaving Joshua at the airport with the realization that persistence does not always mean the right to be superior. Chicago, winter 2020. Late afternoon in a small restaurant in the city center, where people usually gathered after work to have a quick dinner and go home. There were few customers in the room, soft music was playing, and the staff was working calmly, without tension, performing standard routine activities. Sarah Blake sat at a table by the window and slowly flipped through the menu, although she knew what she was going to order. She was 35 years old, worked in real estate, and considered herself a person who knew how to exploit the weaknesses of any system. In recent years, she had developed a simple pattern of behavior that she believed worked flawlessly. If you create conflict loudly and persistently enough, you can avoid paying the restaurant bill. In most cases, the managers chose to avoid a scandal, and this only strengthened her confidence. She placed her order, behaved correctly, but watched the waiter's every move as if waiting for the right moment. When the dish and a glass of red wine were brought to her, Sarah ate in silence for a few minutes, assessing the situation, and then, with a sharp and controlled movement, she caught the glass with her hand, deliberately knocking it over on the table. The wine spilled all over the white tablecloth and partially got on her clothes. Almost instantly, she raised her voice, accusing the waiter of inattention, even though he was a few steps away and did not touch the table. She spoke loudly and clearly so that other patrons could hear her, gestured and demanded that the manager be called immediately, showing indignation that looked rehearsed. The manager came over quickly and listened to her without interruption, while Sarah described in detail how her evening had been ruined, how the service was not up to par, and how she was not going to pay for such service. She was sure that the scenario would end with the usual apology and cancellation of the bill. The manager nodded silently and walked away, saying he would clarify the details, and at that moment, Sarah felt a familiar sense of control over the situation. A few minutes later, however, he returned with a tablet in hand and without further ado, turned on the video from the surveillance camera installed above the gym. The screen clearly showed Sarah knocking over the glass herself, while the waiter stood by and had nothing to do with it. There was a short silence in the room, during which her indignation lost all meaning. Sarah tried to say something, to change the tone, but the manager calmly informed her that an attempt to deliberately create a conflict and refusal to pay the bill had been recorded, and explained that in case of further demands, the police would be called to document the incident. A few minutes later, the police showed up at the restaurant, showed the video, and briefly described the situation, all without shouting or emotion, in a formal and cold manner. Sarah was told that her actions could be considered fraudulent, and then she was offered to either pay the bill immediately and leave the restaurant or continue the conversation in an official capacity. Standing in the middle of the restaurant under the gaze of several patrons, Sarah silently took out her card and paid, feeling her familiar confidence finally disappear. Her scheme, which had worked for years, had failed in the simplest of places, and instead of a free dinner, she had a humiliating experience and a recorded incident. No one tried to teach her a lesson or showed any satisfaction. Everything happened calmly and routinely, but it was in this routine that instant karma manifested itself, which does not require emotions, explanations, or morals, but simply puts an end to where a person was sure of his or her own impunity. Arizona, summer of 2022. A hot evening in a gated residential complex on the outskirts of a small town, where the houses were close together and the lives of the residents were clearly visible through the surveillance cameras installed at the entrances and in the courtyards. Robert Hayes had lived here for over 3 years, and during that time had become a figure that most neighbors tried to avoid unnecessarily. He was 52 years old, worked remotely, and spent most of his time at home, keeping a close eye on what was happening around him. Robert considered himself a man of principle and was convinced that it was thanks to people like him that the complex maintained order. He perceived any noise, conversation in high pitches, laughter in the yard, or late return of neighbors as a personal insult and violation of his rights. Initially, these were isolated appeals to the management company with demands to restore order, but over time, the complaints turned into a regular stream. Robert wrote emails, left messages at the administration office, called after hours, and insisted on inspections, accusing his neighbors of noise, improper parking, damage to common property, and even threatening the security of the complex. Some of these accusations were exaggerated, others were completely made up, but Robert was convinced that the number of complaints would sooner or later force the administration to act as he saw fit. He was especially annoyed by the family from the house across the street, who moved into the complex about a year ago and lived a normal life, returning home in the evening, sometimes having guests, and letting their children play in the yard. For Robert, this was enough to consider them a source of constant problems. He started sending complaints almost every week, describing the situations as if they were systematic and serious violations, and later began to go outside whenever he heard any sound, defiantly recording it on his phone, sometimes deliberately making noise himself to use as evidence in his complaints. Robert was confident that he was acting within the rules and that the administration was obliged to respond to his every word without verification. However, a few months later, the management company began to receive complaints about him, with residents writing about intrusive behavior, provocations, and constant psychological pressure. The administration decided to conduct an internal audit without notifying him in advance and analyze the surveillance footage for a long period of time, including the dates and times Robert had indicated in his complaints. The videos captured a clear and unambiguous picture, showing Robert going out into the yard late at night, slamming doors loudly, deliberately turning on music in an open car, approaching neighbors' houses and making noise, then returning home and sending complaints, describing himself as a victim of other people's violations. Some episodes showed how he deliberately provoked conflicts, waiting for a reaction, which he then used in his messages to the administration. When Robert was invited to a meeting with representatives of the management company, he came confident in his own righteousness, with a folder of printed complaints and pre-prepared arguments, but the conversation quickly went against his script. He was shown fragments of records without comments or explanations, just a chronology of events in which he himself was the source of most of the violations. Robert tried to deny, change the wording, and shift responsibility to others, but the video left no room for interpretation. The management company informed him that due to systematic violations of the house rules, creation of conflict situations, and abuse of the complaint mechanism, the lease would not be extended. The decision was final and had to be implemented within the established time frame. Robert left the office wordlessly, realizing for the first time that all his efforts to control his environment had backfired on him. His attempts to use the system as a tool of pressure led to the fact that it was the system that sentenced him, calmly and without emotion, leaving him homeless in the complex he had tried so hard to control. It was not a public punishment and did not look like revenge, but instant karma manifested itself in its simplest form when his own actions came back to haunt him in the form of a final decision that could not be argued with. These 5 stories show how overconfidence and disregard for simple rules can quickly backfire on those who think they are unpunished. Instant karma doesn't require loud scenes. One decision is enough to make things go wrong. If you are interested in such stories, subscribe to the channel and like it.